John McCain, the senator, described Russia as a gas station masquerading as a country, right? And they at the peaks they were generating something like $350 billion a year in revenues from energy. That's actually significantly reduced this year. Actually, on a monthly basis, it was about $1 billion a day at the peak. We're now around half that level. So, and that impacts on them because ultimately, revenues from oil exports feeds the budget, provides foreign exchange reserves that they can use to buy stuff internationally that breaks sanctions. So again, things are getting more difficult. Budget deficit is increasing. They announced tax increases for next year's budget a couple of weeks ago. Again, this idea of I guess there was a message sent out by the Putin crew that they were sustaining this war. It was great. Nothing was, it was a win for them. There was import substitution. They'd lasted 3.5 years, etc. Things were going great almost, and I don't think they are now, right? I mean, I think now things are just beginning to bite, right? And the longer the war goes on, I think the more difficult it will get for Russia and Russians.
And the White House of last week were quite loudly debating giving US Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, allowing further strikes and kind of almost deepening this pressure that Ukraine is putting on Russia at the moment. If Ukraine can intensify these strikes further, how much worse could this get?
Well, I mean, Trump's comments were quite interesting, right? Because if you go back to the White House ambush in the Oval Office, the message there was Zelensky has no cards. And then at his UN General Assembly address, or in the aftermath of that, I should say, he posted a tweet that said that, Russia's a kind of loser, Putin's a bit of a loser, the war's been lost, and Ukraine can win it. We all struggle to understand what he really meant by that. And maybe actually people have been feeding this information about how successful Ukrainian deep strike drones have been, and that, again, if they can increase the success rate and go to mass production, they could go from taking 40% or 30 to 40% of refined production out to a much more significant share of its refined production out, and bring the Russian economy and the war machine to a grinding halt. So, maybe his comments about the potential to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine was meant to, threaten Putin and warn Putin that he needs to get back to the negotiating table. I mean, the general consensus actually is that, Tomahawk missiles probably wouldn't be a game changer. Probably the game changer is, Ukrainians' own innovation of these deep strike drones that, are proving to be incredibly impactful in terms of both the battlefield and Russia's economy more generally.
And the method of getting those missiles across to Ukraine is under this US Pearl system, seemingly. Basically, the idea that Trump has been very loudly talking about of Europe pays and then they buy the weapons and they're transferred to Ukraine. How sustainable is that model? Because it doesn't completely substitute the quite large package of US support that was going on before this, and if I understand, will soon be coming to an end.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Ukrainians have understood that, the key constraints on the Ukrainians, right, are missile defences, so the Patriots, etc., particularly against ballistic missile systems, and then longer range missiles, the HIMARS, ATACMS, and potentially Tomahawks, etc. I think it's unlikely the Americans are going to want to supply those in sufficient scale. I mean, the Americans have made clear that their priority is China, the sort of Asian front, and would they want to, create a bit of a bottleneck by supplying too many to Ukraine and reduce their own supply? So the Ukrainians themselves have stepped up, and like I said, these deep strike drones that they are developing and their innovative anti-drone technology, I mean, they are filling holes very rapidly, actually. They could be very significantly self-sufficient. Their constraints are finance and scale. Ukraine is a difficult place to do business, a difficult place to manufacture. All those corruption, business environment issues that were there before the war are kind of still there. So again, this is where Europe can certainly step in, provide financing, and partner up with the Ukrainians to be able to produce a lot of these deep strike drones in Europe. The benefit there is, we clearly have a problem with our own defence that has been reflected in all these Russian drone activity in European NATO airspace. So, we should be looking to learn from the Ukrainians. I mean, they're at the cutting edge of defence and warfare at the moment because they have to be, right? I mean, they've had to learn very quickly. And we should be taking advantage of that actually for our own defence. So I think there's opportunities for cooperation between Ukraine and Europe and the Americans as well in terms of learning from what the Ukrainians are learning at the hard end on the battlefield at the moment.
And speaking about the US, I mean, some time ago now, Trump was repeatedly threatening this idea of third-party sanctions against Russia. Is that all but been cancelled or given up by the US administration at this point, do we think?
Well, I mean, look, there's a few things. There's the repo bill, which is about using immobilized Russian assets in the US. I mean, a lot of focus on Europe, Euroclear and Belgium with 190 billion euros of immobilized Russian assets, but the US has some as well. And this repo bill allowing for those assets to be seized by the Americans, I think there's about $30 billion in the US. I mean, that's still there. I hear there's a bit of momentum on that front at the moment. And then there's the sanctions bill from hell, potentially, this idea of 500% tariffs on Russia, or I should say countries doing business with Russia. I mean, I think there's less certainty on that. I mean, I think Trump looks very reluctant to levy any particular sanction on Russia. We've had a debate on this forum about that in the past. In the end, I think Trump wants a back to business as usual relationship with Russia, even though Europe, clearly faces this existential threat. Trump thinks he can kind of segregate those two relationships. And I think the Americans quite like the idea of going after immobilized Russian assets, especially if they can be used to buy American weapons. And actually, in terms of the prior question you asked, I mean, a key issue will be a decision in Europe about using those immobilized Russian assets to pay the annual $100 billion mill to support Ukraine in this war. And a large part of that money, likely, will be used to buy military equipment from the Americans. I mean, they have it. They have a lot of the technology. Europe wants to buy it for Ukraine and for themselves. And the question is, will the Americans sell it? I think Trump will, if there's a large dollar check attached to it. If we pay for it, he'll sell it.
Indeed. Well, where are we as well with the frozen Russian assets that we have in Europe? That sort of $330 billion worth that is the main part of those frozen assets. Are we any closer at the moment to that finally being used either through a loan or by seizing the money itself to help fund Ukraine's defence?
I think we are. I mean, I think if you'd have asked me that question 3 to 4 months ago, I would have said, yes, we need to do it, but our politicians have their heads in the sand and don't really get it. Actually, it's been like a seminal moment. I think a combination of a few things. One is, JD Vance's visit to Europe at the Munich Security Council. I mean, it was kind of spelled out to Europeans that the Americans are no longer there to backstop European security. So Europe is on its own. This existential threat from Russia is clearly there. Look what Russia is doing by flying MiG-31s into Estonia and drones, etc., all over the place. So Americans are not there. There's an existential threat from Russia. We know the cost. Supporting Ukraine is about $100 billion a year. Whereas previously the Americans would provide about 40% of that financing, Europe is on the hook for all of it. And whereas I think there was an assumption maybe the war would end this year, now it looks to be a long war scenario. So Europe will have to spend $100 billion plus a year for many more years to come. And, it's clear that European taxpayers don't really want to do that, right? I mean, populism is on the rise, the far right in Europe. A lot of those far right politicians, argue that we should be spending this money on Ukraine. And remember that we have this money in bank account. It's Russian taxpayer money in our bank, in Western bank accounts, sat doing nothing. So you can take the 330. That would give us 3 years' money to support Ukraine. It would send a very strong signal to Putin in Russia that Ukraine is well financed, it can buy weapons from the Americans and sustain the war and cause a lot of damage to Russia, and probably step up its attacks in terms of those deep strike drone attacks on Russia that is causing so much damage to Russia's refined production. So it all kind of adds up. Perhaps the change in government in Germany was pretty instrumental there. Chancellor Merz has come out very strongly in favour of this reparation loan. There are concerns. The Belgian government, which has about 190 billion euros of the 330 in its jurisdiction, is worried about potential Russian legal action. I think that's overblown, frankly. But anyway, I think European Union is mindful to take Belgian concerns under consideration. So this reparation loan idea has come up. It doesn't involve confiscation. It involves simply creatively using Russia's central bank reserves in our jurisdiction, essentially, whereas at the moment they would have tended to be invested in safe securities like UK gilts, bonds, US treasuries. It will be invested in this reparations loan, which will be a loan issued by European Union or G7 countries, actually. And it'd be a 30-year zero coupon bond or loan. And Russia could get paid back ultimately in 30 years. I think it's unlikely. I think whether it gets paid back will depend on its behaviour and whether it agrees to pay reparations. But it's a nice fix. It ticks lots of boxes. It avoids the legal complications of seizure, but it provides immediate funding to the Ukrainians, and will certainly put them in a much better position to defend themselves.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.